Chief Washington correspondent and Face the Nation anchor John Dickerson is with us. John, let's pick up on that. They say that President Putin will come to this meeting very well prepared, ex-KGB trained officer. We've heard from the Trump administration that they have no formal agenda here. Does this give President Putin an upper hand? We've been hearing that all morning.
Well, yeah, the administration has said they don't have an agenda. That's what they've said publicly. Obviously, privately, they do have an agenda. North Korea, Syria, Ukraine. It's just a question of what the president emphasizes. Certainly, Vladimir Putin has just more experience with these kinds of exchanges, and he's essentially studied his whole life. On the other hand, Donald Trump has been through a few tough negotiations himself. So the question is just how the conversation goes and whether it plays to any of the men's underlying strengths. The key thing, of course, to watch is how they both describe the meeting after it's over. There is often quite a gulf between the description of one country and another, and we'll see in that initial description whether the meeting went well or not as they both seek to characterize it.
And in characterizing that meeting, there are many lawmakers who are urging President Trump to bring up the fact that Russia meddled in the U.S. elections. If Trump does not do that, what do you think the outcome may be?
Well, the reason it's interesting, I mean, for the meeting to go, quote unquote, well in the room, you would imagine the president not bringing that up. It's a sore spot, and they've got lots of other difficult things to discuss. On the other hand, the president is quite limited by Congress these days. Congress, the one bipartisan act in Washington has been the sanctions bill that passed out of the Senate. And so for the president to do some of the things he might want to do to warm relations with Russia in exchange for getting Russia to help the U.S. in its interests, the president needs a little leeway with Congress. How would he get that leeway? By appearing tougher on Russia, because one of the things Republicans and Democrats are worried about is that the president is too soft on Russia, doesn't really recognize the nature of the Russian threat. So that's a way in which the body language in the room kind of works against the president's interests at home, which he needs to improve in order to get more free room to reign in dealing with Russia.
But, John, to your point of the post-meeting analysis, so it's possible they could leave and the president says, yes, I told them not to meddle, and Putin says, we didn't talk about that at all.
Right. And, you know, there's part of this meeting might be spent kind of tweaking the language and saying, look, this is what I'm going to say, but don't take that too literally because I'm playing to my audience over here. You've got a lot of audiences. There's a domestic audience. There's the audience in Syria, the audience in North Korea. And so a little bit of this meeting might be spent, if it happens on good terms, sort of discussing how they will read it out to the public. And to make sure there's not a vast difference as each characterizes what happens.
Not that any of this is staged, John.
No, this is all one big act of serendipity.
And Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, as you know, will be in the room. He, of course, knows Vladimir Putin. What does he bring to the table?
Well, he's kind of a potential sort of shoehorn into the relationship. In other words, somebody who's worked with Putin. He understands the negotiating in Russia certainly better than the president does. So he might be able to close a little bit of the distance between the two men. On the other hand, we will see some complexity in the way the president characterizes this meeting and the way his Secretary of State characterizes it in this administration so far. We've seen some distance occasionally between the president's softer rhetoric about Russia and the rhetoric from his Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and UN ambassador. So usually it's just the Americans and the country they're meeting with where you look for distance between the two readouts of an event. In this case, how the president and how the Secretary of State characterize it will also be something to watch.
Putin, of course, has 18 years experience in government. President Trump was a businessman in his past, not in this formal stagecraft as these sort of meetings go. How do we know what do we know about how President Trump prepares for these meetings?
Well, there's been reporting about how he's been given kind of bullet point instruction on the various different elements, both of Putin's character and also what the objectives are in the conversation. The challenge is often not just the first thing you say, but the fifth or sixth thing you say if you start going down the road on, say, Ukraine or on North Korea, where where it can't really be, you can't really read up on that. You've got to kind of react in the moment. So that'll be the most fascinating thing, is if they skip lightly over the various issues, briefings in short bullet point briefings might be enough. If they really dive into the specifics of something like Syria, then that might be a little bit more complicated. But, you know, the president's quite new to the stagecraft of this. We've seen that throughout his presidency. But in the negotiations he's had to deal with in real estate, he probably has more experience than a lot of presidents dealing with people across the table who have very different interests and who are tough customers.
What does success look like, John, for the president in terms of he can walk out and we can look at this and say, good job, President Trump?
Well, there's a success in the room and outside the room. In the room is a better relationship with Putin. Outside the room is something the president can declare as a win. I'm not sure exactly what that is until we see it.
All right, John Dickerson, thank you very much for joining us from Washington, D.C. More to come for sure.